listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org.
This episode is brought to you by DART from DRMS. In the dairy industry, there are still a few myths about herd management software, but producers using DART see the reality. DART is the proven herd management system built on standardized data used in real herds every day, helping producers organize herd data, monitor performance, and support informed decisions across the farm. DART scales with the operation, supporting herds of any size and the complexity of today's dairies, while connecting herd data across tools like Pocket Dairy and Herd HQ. DART. There are myths. Producers prove the reality. Watch the producer stories at drms.org.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. I'm your host, Connie Kuber, with Sealpro Silage Barrier Films by Connor AgriScience. Thanks for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. So today's topic of conversation is reproduction and what the future looks like in terms of using management tools together to make reproduction more precise, efficient, and manageable, but also better for the cow. Artificial insemination, embryo transfer, ObSync, IVF, all these different tools that we have been really big, major milestones in dairy reproduction. I remember when ObSync came out and it was a big deal and something new to learn. We could talk about what's going to be next on the list of the major feats for dairy reproduction. Today, we're going to talk about Targeted Reproductive Management, or TRM. You'll hear that acronym, and how it brings together the high performance that we've come to expect with synchronization and combining that with data activity monitoring and how it changes the ROI of reproduction more than we thought. I have with me today Dr. Todd Bilby, who is the Dairy Technical Services Director at Merck Animal Health. Welcome, Todd, to the Dairy Voice podcast. Please introduce yourself, tell us how you got to this point in your career, and a little more about what your experience has been.
Yeah, I grew up in northwest Missouri, actually on a beef cattle farm. So I didn't switch to a dairy till I started my PhD, but grew up always around cows and horses and knew I was going to work in ag in an early time in my life. Went to Oklahoma State, got my bachelor's, and it was there that my bachelor's in animal science. There was a guy, Dr. Rod Geiser, was the reproductive physiology teacher, and I took his course, and that's really what started it and got me excited about reproduction. And I knew I was going to do something in ag, just didn't know what it was, and I knew I enjoyed working with cows.
OneTrack is a new choice for progressive dairies looking to simplify feeding practices and elevate performance. Fed at up to 40% of the ration, this high-energy macro ingredient works alongside on-farm ingredients to reduce sourcing, mixing, and batching, freeing up valuable time and resources. For more information, go to OneTrack, that's TRAK, right.com. That's ONETRAKRIGHT.com.
Then I went and fortunately got an assistantship to do my master's. It was more in embryology at University of Arkansas, and I actually was doing a lot of IVF in pigs, and then started doing some things with dairy heifers. Also started doing a lot of superovulation and flushing embryo work in cows as well. And so got my master's there, and that's when I decided I wanted to work in dairy because it was like all the repro stuff. Of course, this was late 90s, right? That was a critical point in the dairy world because fertility was at an all-time low. And so if you as a graduate student, I was reading all this cool research that was trying to go on to solve this problem of low fertility. And I didn't know sickum about dairy. I can tell you that. I mean, I understood cows from beef cattle, and I liked reproduction. But so I was reading all this, and I was like, man, this is where I want to be. There's a lot of neat research. And so I was fortunate to get assistantship to go work with Dr. Bill Thatcher, who is a world-renowned reproductive physiologist at University of Florida. headed down there, and my first week of my PhD was the first time I'd ever been on a dairy farm. So to say I wasn't baptized by fire was a understatement. And I had an uphill learning curve when it came to just understanding dairy, but I fell in love with it and became very passionate about it. Really enjoyed my time there and worked on more embryo work there, worked with BST, worked with synchronization, worked with heat stress and other things. And so then Monsanto hired me, went to work for Monsanto in the Central Valley of California. Mm-hmm. And was there only a couple short years, and the poor BST product started sliding quickly. I saw the writing on the wall, and at the same time, the University of Arizona offered me a dairy extension, assistant professor and dairy extension specialist position at University of Arizona. And so I went there, did extension and research work, and worked a lot with heat stress there as well, and synchronization, and then a lot of resync projects I was doing at the time. Then Texas A&M offered me an associate professor position, dairy extension specialist, and that got me back a little closer to family as well. And so took that position, was with Texas A&M for about 5 years. And then Merck Animal Health, I was doing research with Merck and some of the other pharmaceutical companies, and Merck said, hey, why don't you come do your repro stuff for us? And so I knew I wasn't going to be, like I said, I started in industry, right, with Monsanto, and I knew I wasn't going to be an academic lifer. Enjoyed my time in academia, still have a lot of good friends there, learned a lot. It really helped better me and get my name out there and for a position like this. And so don't regret my time at the universities, but I knew industry is where I wanted to be. And so came to work for Merck 13 years ago, started Dairy Tech Services, and then moved up to where I'm now managing that team of 8 dairy veterinarians or PhDs that are scattered across the U.S. where we support sales and marketing. And so I still get to do my repro, and I get to work with both beef and dairy. I say I moonlight as a reproductive physiologist still, but manage a lot of the dairy teams.
This episode is brought to you by DRMS. DRMS is excited to launch the Fresh Cow Index, FCI, a new metric within the Herd HQ platform. FCI is featured in the Fresh Focus Transition Cow Reports inside Dairy Depot and will be available in DART in the future. FCI combines 25 individual cow variables from DHIA test day data and CDCB genetic evaluations into a single, easy-to-understand score for evaluating transition cow performance. A score of 100 indicates expected performance. Cows above 100 are outperforming predictions, while those below 100 are more likely to underperform and face early culling risk. Producers and consultants can use FCI to evaluate month-over-month changes in feeding and management, understand herd-level transition success, and drill down into Cow Compass for detailed cow-level insights. Herd HQ. See what's happening in your herd. Learn more at drms.org/herd/what-is-herd HQ.
Let's talk about dairy reproduction and how things have changed over the years. How does the reproduction now look different than it did 30, 20, 10 years ago?
I'm at that age where I'm now given the history lesson. I've
yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I first in graduate school, and like I said, first started going to the dairy farms, and fertility was at this all-time low. I think the average pregnancy rate across the U.S. was around 15%. So it was terrible. And a guy any producer was looking for anything to squeak out just one more point of preg rate. There was a huge return on investment to chase that because it was such a critical need, right? And especially in the South and Southeast, Southwest, where I've spent most of my time, you throw heat stress on top of it, it's even worse, right? And so there was even discussions at that time, not even breeding for several months out of the year because it just wasn't worth it. Then ObSync, is just coming on the scene in the mid-90s. And I remember talking to producers, and they're like, 3 shots? You're asking me, we're getting 3 shots. They won't show a heat. And then I breathe them. And it was kind of like, but they were such a critical point. Hey, I'll do whatever it takes.
Right.
And so getting them to give 3 shots and managing groups and run lists and all of that, just the management aspect of that was a challenge. So then advance a few more years and then pre-synchronization. Now you go back around to the producer and you say, okay, now we want you to add 2 or 3 more shots to the beginning of this and start the timing. And then they were like, oh my gosh, here we go again, And now giving shots is just, it's not even a a hard thing, right? It's actually become very simple and part of the day-to-day management, and they do it very well. And we were talking so much back then, and compliance is still an issue, but back then just getting compliance and they give the right shots at the right times to the right cows, and advancement of synchronization really helped, because at that time one of our biggest problems was just catching a cow in heat. That was that's what drove OBSync. Couldn't catch cows in heat. And you think about it, we bred them to produce a lot of milk, so their heat expression went down because of that. And then at the same time, a lot of herds transitioned to concrete, right? We went from grazing or open lots to more confined operations. And so just being on concrete and high milk production, all of that.
You also had more herds were growing in size, and you didn't have time to watch and people to watch all those heats.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. Herds were growing, and we wanted just a systematic way to manage animals and manage in groups. And so, and it's in the 2010, 2012 area, the technology come on board, the way that we can help detect heats. Right into the U.S. anyway. Another way that we could start using technology to help catch these cows in heat, because we knew that was still a problem. With that, now the evolution, here we are today talking about how technology can be used with synchronization and how we can use the benefit of the two to really improve fertility on dairy farms today. Fertility has gotten so much better today. And it's amazing for me how the conversations changed over time, from how do I squeak out one more point of preg rate to my fertility's fine. I don't want to touch it. Like, I don't even want to talk about it. Like, it's ginning good. I got great conception rates. My preg rates, they'll rattle off conception rate and preg rate. And it's more about what kind of semen should I use? Which cows should get what semen? It's those kind of conversations that have really changed over time as well, which is awesome to see. I mean, it's exciting for me to watch that evolution and how well our preg rates have gotten. And I just wonder when we're touching the ceiling of high fertility, because if you look at conception rates on really good farms that are touching almost 60% first service conception rate, or definitely in the well 50s. Well, if you look at our heifers or even beef cows, I mean, when you take lactation out of it, they're hitting a good first service conception rate is in the late 50s or in the 60s. So I think we're getting close to where we're really hitting the top ceiling. And so now the conversations is, how do we maintain high fertility, but do it with less input costs and less cow touches, less shots, less, ways that we can manage these large herds without having to lock them up as much or touch the cow as much. And so I think that's where we're at. And that's where the evolution of this targeted reproductive management also has come to be.
Get your Sealpro silage barrier film today. Protect the seed, fertilizer, labor, and expensive inputs that you've invested in. Choose best-in-class Sealpro now in 3 different versions: traditional 2-roll application, our new co-rolled application, and super simple and wildly successful 1-layer film, Sealpro 1. It's easy to buy, easy to use. Contractor covering? We'll work with them. Learn more at sealprosilage.com. That's SEALPRO silage.com. Family owned and operated for over 25 years. 559-779-5961. That's 559-779-5961. As part of that, then we talk about the monitoring technology, adding that in. Well, I don't think that you think that synchronization protocols are on the way out.
Correct. No, they tried that when technology came to the scene. That was the rumor. You don't have to give any more shots. You just put in this technology. Now we'll catch all the cows in heat. And it didn't take them very long to realize, guess what? Not every cow shows a heat.
Yeah.
And so you end up missing a lot of cows. Cows float out there and get missed. And so the studies early on showed you have to use the combination of the two, because not every cow is going to express a heat.
We swung from one direction to another, and now we're getting more towards the middle. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. Correct. We realize, synchronization in this regards can be your insurance tool, your backup plan. If that cow didn't show a heat, you miss her or something, she's going to end up getting time inseminated. So.
Well, and then the monitoring also provides other information that we can use along with the repro management.
That's right. And I think that's why we're at the steps that we are today, is that, well, first off, you had to have technology on enough cows to even start talking about this, right? When it first came out. But also when, now guys have been using this, there's close to 3 million cows on technology now, 3 million. So a third of our dairy cows are utilizing technology. And that's in total, over 2 million of those is our technology. You're at a point where guys have been using technology for a long time, so they've got the basics down and they're asking the questions, what do I do next? I've got a lot of data coming at me and I know I can do more with it. How can I now become more efficient? How can I use this data? How can I get more bang for my buck, bang from the technology that I'm in? And I think that's what's also helping to drive these conversations of targeted reproductive management and also research. If you look, there's probably 40, 50 plus publications, research publications done by major universities looking at using targeted reproductive management. And so, the research has really come along as well to give us a really sound footing or foundation on where to start, what the protocols should look like, et cetera.
Those protocols and what we can expect are going to evolve.
And they're evolving quickly. And like I said, if you run a chart to look at the number of publications that have the sensor technology in them or targeted repro type discussions in them, it's just going straight up because there's just so many cows under technology, and as a researcher, data is what you need, right? And so having those data points and then really trying to look at what else we can do with all of this besides just breed off heats or catch a cow that might be sick. Now we can start using that data to better even predict what cow might get pregnant or predict what cow needs a shot.
Right. What kind of have you had conversations with dairy producers as far as what they're thinking and how they're trying to wrap their heads around this?
The conversation we get in, they're asking the question, and really this isn't going to be for everybody. Well, first off, you have to have technology, and I just explained that only a third of our cows have technology on them, right? So it's just that third we're talking about. But even that third, they need to be very comfortable doing the basics with repro, and they need to be already high fertility. What we're talking about targeted repro, this is not to squeak out another 1 or 2 preg points. It's how do I maintain high fertility, but do it with less lockups, less shots, less management, et cetera. And so, it's going to take that right person and the person that's asking those type of questions. What more can I do? And the more that progressive mindset. All this data that is coming in and around us today as we're talking about AI and not artificial insemination.
Yeah.
It's all around us. And so people are much more aware of how important this data is and how we can use it to do more in our lives. And for sure on a dairy farm, the evolution of AI from artificial insemination to artificial intelligence, that producer that's asking those right questions already has high fertility, says, I'm ready to take that next step. That's where there's some of the conversations where the hesitation is, and rightfully so, is our fertility has gotten really good on the farms. And I mentioned this earlier. People are scared, like, hey, I don't want to mess with this 30+% preg rates. I've never had fertility this high. I'm more scared to do something that it's going to go down than up or stay the same. And I completely get that. And so that's where the hesitation comes in and probably slow adoption, and rightfully slow. So
from what you're saying, then you need to, as if you're looking into this using technology and the synchronization together, you need to have that sync down first before you jump into any further. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. You need to have synchronization, being able to do that efficiently. You need to have high fertility. Things need to be going good. And this isn't something where they call me and say, Todd, my preg rate's terrible. Should I do targeted reproductive management? I would say no. This is something for somebody that's already doing good and they're good with using the data and the technology. They're good with giving shots and synchronization. And they're saying, okay, I'm ready to take another step.
Many producers rely on the results of protocols like double ObSync. What can you tell us about that?
Double ObSync, wonderful tool. Pre-sync ObSync, double ObSync. I mean, these programs, they yield very high first service conception rates. They've really helped to advance our dairy farms' reproduction and the preg rates and first service conception rates, and double off-sync in particular, the first service conception rates, are so good. These programs, when we get to talking about targeted reproductive management, it's not going to replace that. You will still have those programs on the farm. The thing is, you're going to have more than one program. So, only a portion of the cows might get double off-sync, and the other portion might just get a simple prostaglandin shot and bred off of heats. These double off-sync programs have yielded such high first service conception rates, which is important, but it's also not the only metric to look at, especially if you're going to do something like targeted reproductive management. But the programs work well when followed correctly, and they've really helped get us to where we are today.
TRM, or targeted reproductive management, is based on an idea that when using this kind of monitoring technology, we take advantage of those cows show a strong natural heat. Is that right?
Yeah. So targeted reproductive management is basically saying, if these cows have shown a heat after calving prior to the start of the voluntary waiting period, maybe they don't need to go through all the double off-sync shots as an example. And maybe they just need a simple prostaglandin injection and bred off a heat. And whereas the ones that didn't show a heat, as an example, go into double off-sync. Now, there's multiple ways. I'm just using one example, a simple example. There's more than one protocol that could have a discussion on and how they want to do. If they're doing pre-sync, off-sync on the farm, you could keep that, for example, for your heat cows and breed off of those prostaglandin shots, right? And then your no heat cows, you could do something different with them. So kind of depending on what you're currently doing on the farm or what you're willing to do, but it's just separating those heat cows from the no heat cows and doing something different with them. And so a portion of your cows would get less lockup times, less shots, and yet you would hopefully still achieve the same fertility.
So I have a note here about initial research showing less desirable short-term metrics, but a boost in whole herd metrics. What do you know about that?
Sure. So this is where the hesitation that I spoke of producers are going to have, because one of the conversations I think you have to have when talking about targeted reproductive management with a producer that, let's say, is doing double off-sync and their first service conception rates are doing great, 50 plus or whatever. They're very focused on that, and rightfully so. They're also very focused on preg rates, and rightfully so. It's a good metrics to evaluate. But when you switch to something like this, targeted reproductive management, you'll probably lose 4 or 5 points of first service conception rate, and you'll probably see your preg rate go down a little bit from, when I say preg rate, just looking at like a dairy comp 305 and you run a preg rate. But here's why. It's not because you're getting worse fertility. It's the fact that half of your cows now are starting to get bred at, let's say, 50 days of milk at the end of the voluntary waiting period, and the other half are going through double off-sync and not getting bred till 75 days. So how do you set your voluntary waiting period in dairy comp? Because you have half your herd starting at 50 and half going at 75, as an example. Technically, you should start it at 50, because that's eligible to be bred, but half of those cows, you're not breeding, right? So you've now falsely change that preg rate to where it's going to look worse, but the speed at which you're getting cows pregnant should be much better, right? Because you're taking half your cows and you're starting to breed sooner. The other thing about first service conception rate, we know double off-sync, because of the injections of GnRH and prostaglandin, you can really tightly synchronize those cows to ovulate at the precise time. They've hopefully experienced progesterone priming, and they're really nice and set up, whereas targeted repro, a portion of your cows get bred off of heat, not as tightly set up. And so that's why you'll see a little slide in the first service conception rate. But one of the metrics we say we need to evaluate if switching to like a targeted reproductive management is going back to probably the old school metrics, if you will, of how many pregnant at 100 days and how many are pregnant at 150 days, how many are pregnant at 200 days. Looking at those metrics to say, okay, I'm getting a lot of cows pregnant over time. The speed at which I'm getting cows pregnant and the number that are pregnant through that lactation is higher. And that's an important metric that you'll have to utilize to really evaluate targeted reproductive management. I'm not saying you throw away first service conception rate or preg rate, but you need to mentally realize you're going to see those slide a little bit, but that doesn't mean your reproduction is failing. It's just because you have a portion of your cows that are starting earlier and getting bred off of heats.
So would that be a temporary situation, or is it just just need to think of it differently?
Yeah, I think, yes, you need to think of it differently and just evaluate more metrics than just first service conception rate.
Okay.
That's where it's going to be important, because otherwise you're going to switch to targeted repro and they see a few points slide on their first service or their preg rate looks wonky, then, they're going to say this didn't work.
So how does that translate into an economic advantage then?
The economics is just the speed at which we're getting cows pregnant. How quickly do we get them pregnant? But then also the number pregnant. Research studies by Dr. Chabelle at University of Florida, as an example, did a really nice study using targeted repro, comparing it to going through double off sync, just like we were talking, and half the cows, would go one way and the other half in a double off sync, or he had the control group just all went through double off sync like we typically do today. And he kept the technology on them throughout, all the way through the end of lactation. He followed all the cows all the way through the end of lactation. He had half the number of cows open in the targeted reproductive management group at the end of that lactation than the double off sync group, meaning more got pregnant. He had less culls, so his replacement cost was less. And when he put the economics to that, it averaged across first lactation and second plus lactation, it averaged a return on investment of about $85 a cow. A lot of that driven by the fact that he had less open cows at the end of the lactation.
Right.
And if you look at the speed at which those animals were getting pregnant, those that had the technology on them got pregnant faster over time. And a lot of that was driven by the fact they were re-inseminating more cows quicker, so better, if you will. But the first service conception rates, if you look at that study, if I just looked at first service conception rates, and the first lactation cows, they were a few points lower. And in the mature cows, it was actually a few points higher. A lot of our research studies in repro, we stop after first or second preg check. So we'll say we do a treatment, whatever it is, this synchronization program versus this synchronization program. We'll preg check them once and then maybe a second time to see about embryo loss. And then we'll say this treatment's better than this treatment based off of that preg check. Very few of them follow them over time, rightfully so. But in this particular case, because you have the technology on them throughout their lactation, and that's part of the management, then following them through the end of lactation to really see how many of those, and then look, how many got pregnant by 100 days, how many by 150 days, and then how many at the end of the lactation. In that research study and other studies, they've shown that targeted repro, you got more cows pregnant at the end of lactation. So they're able to start their next lactation, which is really what you want.
So say I'm a producer and I've got an off-sync program that's going pretty well. How can I get started in this using these kind of protocols of the TRM?
Getting started, one, just be honest with yourself as far as, are you using the technology to the extent at which it was meant and doing the basics correct? Is your fertility good? And I'll say greater than 28% preg rate if you're looking for a metric. And you feel comfortable, your management team can handle 2 protocols on a farm instead of 1, which it's all just running a list, right? I mean, it's just whatever comes up on the list, that's what I go give shots. So it's not like you're going to see anything different there. But there is a little layer, just like anything we've done over time, there's a little more complexity added when we want to try to chase efficiency. I think being honest with yourself, is that really a logical next step? Am I really ready to take that step? Or I don't want that headache, or I'm very happy with the way it is and I don't want to do this. I'm not trying to force somebody. If you got something that's working and you want to stick to it, by all means do so. But I think that would be where this would start.
So then as far as using TRM, using the OBSync, using the monitoring system, would you say that this benefits the whole cow as far as her stress levels and how she just lives out her life?
The nice thing about this is it does just that. It lets cows be cows. It allows you to, a little less lockup times, less injections, and just let them do what they were born to do.
Todd, do you have any other thoughts that you want to share with us about this system?
we focused a lot of this conversation around more of the lactating cow, I would say, but there's some also great projects publications that have been done using this in heifers.
Ah, okay.
And we know how important it is to get a heifer pregnant at the beginning of that breeding window or the breeding time, right? When they get moved into a breeding pen, because we know the cost of a days on feed isn't cheap. Replacement costs aren't cheap. And so the quicker we can get her pregnant into that next lactation, the better. Having technology on the heifers, there's been some recent publications, again, one out of University of Florida, Dr. Ricardo Chabel, who showed we can really time this where we know that our shots, the shots we've been given for years, prostaglandin and GnRH, there are time in a cow's estrus cycle, and this is true for cows or heifers, where they work better than other times. For example, if I gave a prostaglandin to a cow that just showed a heat 3 days ago, you're not going to regress that CL, right? That CL has to be mature enough into that estrus cycle closer to 6-7 days to really have an effect. If I go in with GnRH within the first 2 or 3 days, I'm going to have a very low ovulation rate. You got to have a follicle big enough on that ovary to induce ovulation. So there's times in a cow's estrus cycle that these products work better. And now with technology, we know where they're at in the cycle. We never knew that before. And that's why if you look at the basis of pre-sync, as an example, pre-synchronization, whether it's double OVSync, that first OVSync, a double OVSync, or the traditional pre-sync OVSync with 2 shots of prostaglandin 14 days apart, the reason these pre-synchronization programs come about was to force cows to be in the right stage of their cycle, which was between days 5 and 9 of their estrus cycle when they started with first GnRH of that breeding OVSync. That's why pre-sync came about. Now with our technology, we know where they're at in their cycle. We didn't before, so we had to force them with shots to be in the right stage of the cycle. Now that we have technology, we know where she's at in her estrus cycle, assuming if she showed a heat. And so I think as you start looking at research and where we're headed is, being able to use that information to time when we start synchronization and time when we give a prostaglandin injection or a GnRH so that we get the most bang for our buck from that product, why we give that product, the better. And so, for example, in heifers, when Dr. Chabel did a nice study that if he gave a prostaglandin injection between days like 4 and 6 of a heifer, he only got 36% conception rate and 40% regress, not even that much, 20% regress the CL, I don't remember exactly. And the later in the cycle, they noticed conception rates got much higher and CL death got much higher, like we've always known. And so now with technology, and we're talking about in heifers, you can move them into the breeding pen based off of not only maybe age and weight, but where they're at in their estrus cycle. If they've just had a heat, maybe you can skip them from giving an injection and get them the next week, as an example, so that you get a really high response to that prostaglandin injection right when you move them into the breeding pen. And when Ricardo looked at this, when he gave that injection in the last half of the estrus cycle of a heifer, if he gave a prostaglandin injection, he bred 99% of them in a week and got a 65%, I think, conception rate. We can time these injections now. I mean, right now, you look how heifers are managed. They're moved, usually weekly into a breeding pen, and they might all just get an injection of prostaglandin randomly. And we know that 20 and 25% of that's wasted because it's going to be early in that heifer's estrus cycle. Now we don't have to do that. We can move them in, and we know where they're at in their estrus cycle, and we say, hey, no use to give a shot to this one. We'll give her a shot next week if she doesn't show a heat, or, hey, this one's ready, we can give her a shot. And so you can start doing that. And we've done some studies and then even have some really nice on-farm trials, you could call them, or testimonials to where it worked as well. And so we're seeing some really good conceptions and really speeding up how quickly we can get that heifer to show a heat and get pregnant by doing a kind of targeted repro on the heifers as well. We're going to repeat some of that in the lactating cows to see also on those cows when you're doing targeted repro for the ones that have shown a heat, can we target when we give prostaglandin? So that, when we do give it, we're very efficient. We're only giving it to cows that will actually respond. And then in turn, will those heats be better and higher conception rates to that. That study's ongoing now, but we've done this in heifers, and I think there's a lot of benefit of looking at technologies and a TRM approach in heifers as well.
Well, thank you, Todd. This has really been a very interesting conversation about all these tools that we can use to do a better job with reproduction. Where can our listeners go to find more? I have here mahcattle.com. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. You can go there to find more information. And I always encourage work with your veterinarian, work with your management team, work with whoever your repro experts are, whether it's the university extension, the AI companies, whatever, but work with your management team and especially your veterinarian when doing anything like this.
This has been a great conversation. Thanks for talking with me today. My guest has been Dr. Todd Bilby, who is the Dairy Technical Services Director at Merck Animal Health. I'm Connie Kuber with Sealpro Silage Barrier Film by Connor AgriScience, and you've been listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News. Again, please subscribe, like, and share the podcast. And as always, I'll remind you to stay safe out there and really put safety as a priority on your farm, no matter how small or large you are. So thanks for listening, everyone. We'll talk again very soon.